A cold dread, familiar and unwelcome, settles in the pit of your stomach when you see it. The glint of steel, the dark, unblinking eye of a gun barrel. Now imagine that barrel is pointed directly at your chest in the middle of a crowded shopping mall, held by a police officer whose face is a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He's yelling, "You're trying to stay calm," and hundreds of cell phones are recording your potential last moments. But this isn't just another tragic headline in the making. This is the story of the hunter becoming the hunted, of a carefully laid trap snapping shut in the most explosive way possible. Because the woman on the other end of that gun, she's not just an innocent shopper. She's Special Agent Maya Reynolds of the FBI, and the man threatening to end her life is the very subject of her career-defining investigation. The Northgate Galleria was a cathedral of consumerism, all gleaming marble floors, soaring glass ceilings, and the gentle, piped-in melodies of a string quartet. It was the last place you'd expect the raw, ugly face of injustice to appear. But for FBI Special Agent Maya Reynolds, it was a hunting ground. For 3 weeks, she had been a ghost in this polished world, a shadow with a Nordstrom bag and a venti latte. Her target wasn't a terrorist or a mob boss. He was far more common, and in many ways, far more dangerous. Officer Mark Callahan of the Oak Haven Police Department. Callahan was a cop's cop, a 10-year veteran with a chest full of commendations and a reputation for being a hard charger. To his superiors and the powerful police union, he was a hero. But to the Civil Rights Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he was a predator. His file, codenamed Operation Bulldog, was thick with complaints, all from minority residents, all detailing excessive force, illegal searches, and brutal roadside interrogations. There was the case of Marcus Thorne, a college student left with a fractured orbital bone after being pulled over for a broken taillight, and David Chen, a shop owner whose store was tossed without a warrant because Callahan had a gut feeling. The problem was, none of it stuck. Callahan's reports were masterpieces of defensive prose. Witnesses suddenly developed amnesia. Body cam footage was mysteriously corrupted. The Oak Haven PD's Internal Affairs Department, run by Callahan's old academy buddy, cleared him every single time. He was untouchable, a cancer hiding behind a badge. So the FBI had sent Maya. At 32, she was one of the sharpest agents in the division, a graduate of Howard University and Georgetown Law with a mind like a steel trap and a deep personal understanding of the two faces of justice in America. Her undercover role was simple: to observe Callahan in a low-stress environment. He moonlighted as off-duty security at the Galleria, a cushy gig that mostly involved directing lost tourists and telling teenagers to pull up their pants. The Bureau's theory was that a man with Callahan's kind of rage couldn't keep it bottled up. Eventually, the mask would slip. On this Tuesday afternoon, Maya was nursing a lukewarm coffee at a small cafe table overlooking the main atrium. She wore ripped jeans, a vintage concert t-shirt, and oversized sunglasses, the polar opposite of her usual crisp, professional FBI attire. She blended in perfectly. Across the atrium, she watched Callahan. He was standing with a younger, fresh-faced officer, probably a rookie named Chris Evans, according to the file. Callahan wasn't just standing guard. He was scanning the crowd with a predator's intensity. His eyes lingered too long on black teenagers, on a Hispanic family laughing near the fountain. He saw threats where there were only people. Maya's phone buzzed. It was a text from her supervisor, Assistant Special Agent in Charge David Peterson. "Anything?" She typed back. "Negative, same as yesterday. He's a statue with a scowl." Peterson replied almost instantly. "Stay sharp. A bulldog always bites eventually." Maya took a sip of her coffee and watched as a woman, elegantly dressed, hurried past Callahan, accidentally dropping a credit card without noticing. It was a Platinum Amex. Maya saw it, and she saw Callahan see it. The officer didn't call out to the woman. He didn't pick it up and turn it into mall security. Instead, a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He bent down, picked up the card, and slipped it into his pocket. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. Not the violent outburst she expected, but something just as insidious. A small act of corruption, of theft. She discreetly turned on the audio recorder on her phone and activated the pinhole camera on her purse. The plan had been to observe, but protocol allowed for adaptation. She needed to create a pretext, to interact with him, to see what he would do. She finished her coffee, stood up, and began to walk a wide, slow arc toward the main exit, a path that would take her directly past Callahan and his partner. As she walked, she accidentally let her own wallet slip from her purse, spilling her driver's license and a few credit cards onto the polished floor. It was a classic, simple move. She bent down to gather her things, making a small show of being flustered. "Oh, for goodness sake," she muttered, just loud enough to be heard. That's when she felt the shadow fall over her. "Having some trouble, ma'am?" The voice was deceptively calm, but it held an undercurrent of steel that Maya had come to recognize from hours of listening to interrogation tapes. She looked up into the smug face of Officer Mark Callahan. "Just clumsy today, officer," Maya said, offering a disarming smile as she tucked her cards back into her wallet. "Thank you." She made to stand, but Callahan didn't move. He was a wall of blue wool and coiled muscle, blocking her path. His eyes weren't looking at her face. They were fixed on her wallet. "That's a lot of plastic you got there," he said, his tone shifting from feigned concern to pointed suspicion. His younger partner, Officer Evans, shifted his weight uncomfortably beside him. "I suppose," Maya said, her internal alarm bells ringing loudly. She kept her demeanor open and non-threatening. "You have a good day, officers." She tried to step around him. He shifted his body, blocking her again. "Hold on a second. Let me see some ID." This was the moment, the pivot. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice steady. "You dropped a wallet full of credit cards. We've had reports of a credit card theft ring operating in this area. Young women, just like you," he said, the words "just like you" dripping with insinuation. "I can assure you these are my cards," Maya replied, her hand tightening on her purse. Inside, the camera was capturing every micro-expression on his face, the slight sneer, the glint of power in his eyes. "Then you won't mind proving it," he said. It wasn't a question. "Show me your ID and show me the cards you just picked up." A small crowd was beginning to form a curious circle around them. Shoppers, sensing the charge in the air, slowed their pace. Maya knew that this audience was both a danger and a potential shield. "Officer," she said, speaking slowly and clearly, "you have no probable cause to demand my identification or to search my personal property. I haven't committed any crime." Callahan's face darkened. The calm veneer cracked, revealing the ugly rage beneath. "Ma'am, you're in a private establishment, and I am the acting authority here. You fit a description. Now show me the ID, or I'm going to place you under arrest for obstruction." The lie was so blatant, so audacious, it almost took Maya's breath away. There was no description. There was only him, his badge, and his prejudices. "I don't consent to any searches," Maya stated firmly, "and I will not be showing you my ID without cause. If you wish to detain me, you'll need to articulate your reasonable suspicion." She used the precise legal language on purpose. It was a test. A regular citizen might not know those terms. An officer of the law would, and hearing them from a woman he had already stereotyped and dismissed would be like throwing gasoline on a fire. It worked perfectly. Callahan's face contorted into a mask of fury. "You think you're smart? You think you can talk your way out of this?" He took a step forward, invading her personal space. "I am the law here. You understand me?" His partner, Evans, finally spoke up, his voice hesitant. "Mark, maybe we should just run her name. See if anything comes up." "Shut up, Evans," Callahan snapped, not even looking at him. His focus was entirely on Maya. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep like a vice. "You're coming with me." Instinct, honed by years of training at Quantico, surged through Maya. She didn't resist, didn't pull away. That would only give him the excuse he needed to escalate to physical force. Instead, she went rigid, planting her feet. "Take your hand off me, officer," she said, her voice dropping, losing all its previous warmth and taking on a diamond-hard edge. The direct challenge sent Callahan over the precipice. For him, this was not about a stolen credit card anymore. It was about dominance. It was about a black woman refusing to bend to his will. "You are under arrest," he roared, his voice echoing through the atrium. He reached for his handcuffs with one hand while keeping a crushing grip on her arm with the other. "On what charge?" Maya demanded, her voice cutting through his rage. "Assault on a police officer, obstruction of justice, resisting arrest." He spat the words out, creating the crimes as he went. The crowd gasped. Cell phones were out now, dozens of them, their small lenses pointed at the scene like a digital firing squad. Callahan saw them, but in his fury, he didn't care. He felt invincible. Then Maya said the 5 words that sealed his fate. "I do not recognize your authority." It was a statement of fact so absolute, so unexpected, that it stunned him for a fraction of a second. In that moment of shocked silence, his grip on her arm loosened just enough. But it wasn't fear or confusion that filled the void in his mind. It was pure, unadulterated fury. He let go of her arm, but it wasn't to de-escalate. It was to create space. In a single, fluid motion that was both terrifyingly fast and seemed to happen in slow motion, Officer Mark Callahan drew his Glock 19 from its holster. The click of the safety being disengaged was a gunshot in the suddenly silent mall. He leveled the weapon, his 2 hands shaking slightly with adrenaline, and aimed it directly at the center of Maya Reynolds' chest. "On your knees, now!" he screamed, his face a grotesque portrait of a man who had completely lost control. The crowd screamed. Officer Evans stared, his face ashen, frozen in disbelief. But Maya Reynolds didn't flinch. She didn't raise her hands. She simply stood there, her eyes locked on his, a chilling, unnerving calm settling over her as she looked down the barrel of the gun held by the man she had been sent to expose. The world narrowed to the 10 feet of polished marble separating Maya from Officer Callahan. The screams of the crowd, the frantic shouts of mall security running toward them, the horrified expression on Officer Evans's face, it all faded into a dull peripheral roar. All that mattered was the man, the gun, and the torrent of protocol and training that flooded Maya's mind. Rule number 1, control your breathing. Panic is a contagious disease, and you will not be patient 0. She took a slow, deliberate breath, letting it out just as slowly. She kept her hands visible, open at her sides, a universal sign of non-aggression. Her eyes remained locked on Callahan's. She saw the tremor in his hands, the wild, unfocused rage in his eyes. He wasn't just a threat. He was a liability, a bomb with a lit fuse. "Officer Callahan," she said, her voice calm, clear, and devoid of fear. It cut through his screaming with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Using his name was a calculated move, a psychological jab to remind him of his identity, to pull him back from the brink of whatever abyss he was teetering over. "Don't you say my name!" he shrieked, spittle flying from his lips. "Get on the ground! On the ground now!" "I will not be getting on the ground," Maya stated, not as a defiance but as a simple fact. "You have made a grave error, and I am giving you one opportunity, your only opportunity, to correct it. Lower your weapon." From the corner of her eye, she saw mall security guards arriving, their own weapons drawn but held in a low-ready position, their faces etched with confusion and panic. They were yelling for Callahan to stand down, but he was deaf to them. "You think this is a game?" he bellowed, taking a half-step closer. His finger was tense on the trigger. The margin for error was now 0. It was time. "My name," Maya said, her voice resonating with an authority that silenced the chaos around her, "is Special Agent Maya Reynolds. I am a federal officer with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." She slowly, deliberately reached into the back of her jeans, her movements telegraphic so as not to be misinterpreted as reaching for a weapon. She pulled out a thin leather wallet containing her credentials. She flipped it open with a practiced flick of her wrist, displaying the golden FBI shield and her official identification. "You have drawn your weapon on a federal agent in the performance of her duties," she continued, her voice like ice. "You are currently obstructing a federal investigation. Case file 28A-C77491. Codenamed Operation Bulldog. Your target, Officer Callahan, is you." The words hit the air with the force of a physical blow. Callahan's face, which had been a mask of crimson rage, went slack. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty, sickly white. His eyes darted from Maya's unflinching gaze to the gold shield, then back. Disbelief warred with dawning, stomach-churning horror. That's, that's fake, he stammered, but his voice lacked all conviction. The bravado had vanished, replaced by a desperate, cracking uncertainty. His partner, Chris Evans, looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His mouth hung open, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. He looked at Maya, truly looked at her for the first time, and saw not the person his partner had profiled, but a figure of immense and terrifying authority. The pinhole camera on my purse and the audio recorder on my phone have captured this entire exchange, from your initial, baseless stop to this moment, Maya informed him, her tone clinical. Every word, every threat, including your illegal confiscation of a stolen credit card belonging to a Mrs. Eleanor Vance, which I believe is currently in your right front pants pocket. That last detail shattered what little composure Callahan had left. His eyes widened in pure animal panic. It was one thing to be accused of drawing his weapon. It was another to be caught in a petty, provable crime by the goddamn FBI. His gun hand, which had been trembling with rage, now trembled with fear. The barrel of the Glock wavered, dipping toward the floor. Lower your weapon. Now, Maya commanded, each word a hammer blow. With a choked sob that was part rage and part utter despair, Officer Mark Callahan, slowly, shakily, lowered his gun. The instant the weapon was no longer pointed at her, two mall security guards surged forward, flanking him. Simultaneously, Maya pulled out her own phone. She didn't call 911. She hit a single number on her speed dial. It was answered on the first ring. Peterson, the voice on the other end said. ASAC Peterson, this is Special Agent Reynolds, Maya said, her voice never wavering, her eyes still locked on the broken man in front of her. Execute the warrant. We have him. The situation is active. She paused, glancing at the gun now hanging limply in Callahan's hand. And he is a definitive flight and safety risk. Advise responding units that the suspect is armed and has already demonstrated a willingness to use lethal force against federal law enforcement. In that moment, standing in the center of the Northgate Galleria, surrounded by a stunned and silent crowd, the power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. The hunter was now caged. The prey was now in absolute control. And for Officer Mark Callahan, the world as he knew it had just come to a permanent, crashing end. The 10 minutes that followed were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Before the local Oak Haven police could even dispatch a cruiser, two unmarked black sedans screeched to a halt at the mall's main entrance, sirens blaring. Men and women in dark blue windbreakers with FBI emblazoned in bold yellow letters swarmed the atrium. They moved with a purpose and efficiency that made the mall cops and the shell-shocked Officer Evans look like amateurs. The scene was secured with ruthless precision. The crowd was pushed back. Witnesses were calmly but firmly separated and identified for later interviews. One agent took possession of Callahan's service weapon. Another expertly retrieved the stolen Amex from his pocket, dropping it into an evidence bag. Callahan himself stood frozen, a statue of disbelief, his face a pallid gray. He was not yet in handcuffs, a professional courtesy that was about to expire, but he was flanked by two grim-faced agents who looked as if they could snap him in half without breaking a sweat. Maya's supervisor, ASAC David Peterson, a tall, imposing man with silvering hair and a permanent look of weary disappointment in the human race, strode up to her. He scanned her from head to toe. You okay, Reynolds? I'm fine, sir, she said, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving a cold, clear focus in its wake. Your report will need to be detailed, he said, a slight understatement. He glanced over at Callahan, his lip curling in disgust. Idiot. We gave him enough rope to hang a herd of elephants, and he braided it into a noose for himself. The first Oak Haven PD car finally arrived. The sergeant who stepped out, a heavy-set man named Miller, was a friend of Callahan's. He saw the FBI jackets, his friends surrounded, and immediately went on the defensive. What the hell is going on here, he demanded, puffing out his chest. This is our jurisdiction. Peterson turned to face him, his sheer presence making the sergeant take an involuntary step back. Your jurisdiction is currently a federal crime scene, Sergeant. One of your officers has committed aggravated assault against a federal agent. So with all due respect, this is my jurisdiction now. You and your men will secure the perimeter and direct traffic. Is that understood?" The sergeant's face flushed with anger, but he saw the cold, unyielding authority in Peterson's eyes and wisely shut his mouth. The balance of power was clear. Within the hour, the scene had been processed, and the key players were relocated to the sterile, oppressive atmosphere of the Oak Haven Police Precinct, not for an Oak Haven PD investigation, but because the FBI was commandeering their interview rooms. Maya gave her preliminary statement, a dry, factual account of the events, her voice a monotone that betrayed none of the terror she had felt looking down the barrel of Callahan's gun. Her training was a shield, keeping the emotional trauma at bay, at least for now. Meanwhile, Callahan was in another room, and he wasn't alone. With him was Patrick O'Malley, the bulldog lawyer for the police union. O'Malley was a master of spin, a man who could turn a blatant act of police brutality into a heroic officer's split-second, life-saving decision. "They're railroading you, Mark," O'Malley was saying, his voice a low, conspiratorial growl. "This is a setup. This FBI agent, Reynolds, she provoked you. She used legal jargon to confuse and agitate you. You felt your life was in danger. She made a furtive movement. You acted according to your training." Callahan, still dazed, latched onto the lifeline. Yeah, she was reaching for something. In her pants. I thought she had a weapon." "Exactly," O'Malley said, his eyes gleaming. "She refused a lawful order. She matched a description. She escalated the situation. You were the victim here, forced to draw your weapon to protect yourself and the public." It was a complete fabrication, a narrative woven from thin air, but it was a narrative that had worked dozens of times before. It was the us versus them defense, the shield of the thin blue line. The linchpin of their story, however, was Officer Chris Evans, the rookie. Evans sat in a small windowless office, a cup of styrofoam coffee growing cold in his trembling hands. An FBI agent, a calm woman named Special Agent Davies, was asking him questions. She wasn't aggressive or accusatory. She simply asked him to state what he saw, and Evans was terrified. He had been on the force for 8 months. Mark Callahan was his training officer, a man who was lauded as a hero in the precinct. To go against him was career suicide. He'd be labeled a rat, ostracized, and his life on the job would become a living hell. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at him to back up Callahan's story. "So, in your own words, Officer Evans," Agent Davies said gently, "tell me what happened after Officer Callahan asked the woman for her identification." Evans swallowed hard. He remembered the fury in Callahan's eyes. He remembered Maya's impossible calm. He remembered the horrifying moment the gun came out, aimed not at a threat, but at a woman who had simply refused to be intimidated. He remembered there was no furtive movement. There was no threat. There was only his partner's ego, spiraling into a violent rage. She was being difficult, Evans began, his voice barely a whisper. He was trying to find the words, the right combination that would protect him without being a complete lie. "Difficult how?" Davies pressed, her gaze unwavering. "She wouldn't show her ID," he stammered. Just then the door opened and the union lawyer, O'Malley, stuck his head in. "Officer Evans, you don't say another word. This interview is over." He shot a venomous glare at Agent Davies. "My client will not be answering any more questions without me present." Davies simply nodded, a small, knowing smile on her face. She had seen this 100 times. The system was circling the wagons, closing ranks to protect its own. But she, Maya, and ASAC Peterson knew something that O'Malley and Callahan didn't. The mall had over 200 high-definition security cameras, and dozens of civilians had captured the incident on their phones. O'Malley could build his narrative, and Evans could be pressured into silence. But in the 21st century, video was the great equalizer. The hard karma was already in motion, a digital tidal wave that was about to come crashing down on Officer Mark Callahan and the system that had protected him for far too long. The days following the mall incident were a grueling siege. For Maya, the work shifted from the field to a cramped office, surrounded by monitors displaying different camera angles of the confrontation. She was officially the victim in an assault case, but she was also the lead investigator on the larger civil rights case against Callahan. It was a strange, disorienting duality. One moment she was giving a statement to a fellow agent about the fear she felt, and the next she was directing the analysis of Callahan's financial records. The public reaction was explosive. Civilian videos of the incident went viral within hours. News outlets played the clip on a loop. A white police officer, face twisted in rage, holding a gun on a calm, unarmed black woman. The narrative was powerful and on the surface, simple. But the Oak Haven PD, guided by Patrick O'Malley, launched a ferocious counteroffensive. Callahan, placed on paid administrative leave, gave a single tearful interview to a friendly local news anchor. "My life was in danger," he claimed, his voice choked with emotion. She made a move for her waistband. "I had a split second to make a decision. With the threats against law enforcement today, I did what I had to do to go home to my family." He was painted as the hero, the victim of a calculated provocation. The phrase anti-police rhetoric was used repeatedly. The union leaked Maya's name to the press. Suddenly, her face was everywhere. Pro-police blogs and right-wing news sites dug into her past, trying to paint her as a radical activist with a vendetta against law enforcement. They found nothing, of course, but that didn't stop them from manufacturing insinuations. She was forced to change her phone number after a deluge of death threats. The siege was not just legal, it was personal. "They're trying to put you on trial," Esek Peterson said, sliding a thick file onto her desk. "Standard playbook. If you can't defend the action, attack the victim." "Let them," Maya said, not looking up from a monitor where she was syncing an audio file with a security camera angle. "It just shows their desperation." The file Peterson had given her was the reason for her focus. It was the original case, the one that had started Operation Bulldog, the assault on Jamal Hayes. Jamal was a 19-year-old community college student who had been pulled over by Callahan for allegedly rolling through a stop sign. The stop ended with Jamal in the hospital with 2 broken ribs and a concussion. Callahan claimed Jamal had been combative and had taken a swing at him, forcing him to use necessary force. Jamal's public defender had urged him to take a plea deal on a resisting arrest charge to avoid jail time. With the new scrutiny on Callahan, Jamal Hayes had found his courage. He agreed to speak with Maya again. The interview took place in a sterile FBI conference room. Jamal was a quiet, nervous young man who barely made eye contact. He spoke in a low murmur, recounting the night that had derailed his life. "He pulled me over, said I didn't stop fully," Jamal recounted, his hands fidgeting. "He was just angry from the start. He was shining his flashlight in my eyes, asking where I was going, what I was doing in this neighborhood. I tried to be polite, you know. 'Yes, sir. No, sir.' But everything I said seemed to make him madder." Jamal explained that when he reached into his glove box to get his registration, Callahan had ripped the car door open and dragged him out onto the pavement. "He said I was reaching for something." "The same thing he said about you," Jamal said, finally looking at Maya, a flicker of connection in his eyes. "He slammed me against the car. I never tried to hit him. I just tried to cover my head. He kneed me in the ribs. Again and again. His partner, the other cop, he just watched." "His partner?" Maya asked, her pen pausing over her notepad. "Was his partner Officer Evans?" Jamal shook his head. "No, this was before him. It was an older guy, Officer Riley. He retired a few months after." A new name, a new lead. While one team was building the airtight case for the assault at the mall, Maya tasked another team with finding the retired Officer Riley. Meanwhile, Mark Callahan was becoming unhinged. Confined to his home, watching his face plastered across the news, he felt the walls closing in. The union's support felt hollow. He started drinking heavily. He made angry, rambling posts on social media under an anonymous account, and he tried to intimidate the one person he thought he could break. Officer Chris Evans. Evans received a text from a blocked number. "Rats get what they deserve. Keep your mouth shut if you know what's good for you and your family." Another followed a day later. "Think about your career. Think about your future." Evans was terrified. He showed the text to his wife, who begged him to tell the FBI. But he was trapped between his fear of Callahan and his fear of being ostracized by the only professional brotherhood he had ever known. He felt like he was drowning. He stopped sleeping. Every knock on the door made him jump. The siege was working. The pressure was building on everyone, and it was only a matter of time before something or someone finally broke. The search for the retired officer, Frank Riley, ended in a quiet suburb 3 hours north of Oakhaven. He was living on his pension, spending his days gardening and trying to forget the 30 years he had spent wearing a badge. When two FBI agents showed up at his door, he wasn't surprised. He seemed almost relieved. "I knew this day would come," he said, ushering them into a living room filled with photos of his grandchildren. It was only a matter of time with Mark. Riley, free from the pressures of the force and the code of silence, talked. He described Callahan as a ticking time bomb who saw every interaction with a minority citizen as a personal challenge. He recounted the night of Jamal Hayes' arrest with a weary shame. "The kid did nothing," Riley said, his voice heavy with guilt. "He rolled the stop sign, maybe, a $50 ticket. But Mark saw him, and it was like a switch flipped. He baited him, pushed him. When he pulled the kid out of the car, I should have stepped in, but I didn't." "Why not?" one of the agents asked. "Because it's what you do," Riley sighed. "You back up your partner. You write the report to match his story. You lie on the stand if you have to. It's the wall, the blue wall. And if you make a crack in it, it comes crashing down on you." He agreed to give a formal, sworn statement. It was the first major crack in the case, a direct contradiction to Callahan's official report, coming from his own partner. Back in Oakhaven, Chris Evans was reaching his breaking point. The anonymous threats had escalated. A dead rat was left on his doorstep. His car tires were slashed in the precinct parking lot, a clear message that he wasn't safe, even among his own. The other officers were shunning him, giving him the silent treatment. He was an outcast, a pariah. One night, his wife, Sarah, found him sitting in their dark living room, staring at his service weapon on the coffee table. "Chris, this has to stop," she pleaded, her eyes filled with tears. "This isn't just about your career anymore. This is about our lives. This is about what's right." She picked up his phone. "You know what to do. You know who to call. Be the man I married, not the officer they want you to be." The next morning, a lawyer representing Chris Evans contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office. He stated that his client was willing to cooperate fully with the federal investigation in exchange for protection for himself and his family. ASOAC Peterson took the call personally. He, Maya, and a federal prosecutor met Evans and his lawyer at a secure off-site location. Evans was a changed man. The fresh-faced rookie was gone, replaced by a haunted, exhausted man who looked 10 years older. He recounted everything. Not just the mall incident, but the dozens of other times he had witnessed Callahan engage in misconduct. He talked about the racial slurs Callahan would mutter after a traffic stop, the way he would illegally search cars without cause, bragging about his cop's intuition. He provided the internal context that no security camera could ever capture. "He told me that the most important thing to protect is your partner," Evans said, his voice cracking. He said, "It doesn't matter what happened. It only matters what's in the report. He taught me how to write them, how to use the right language to justify anything." Evans's testimony, combined with Frank Riley's statement, painted a devastating picture. This wasn't about one bad day at the mall. This was a pattern of behavior, a reign of terror conducted by a man who believed he was above the law, enabled by a system designed to protect him. The final piece of the puzzle came from the forensic accounting team. They had been digging into Callahan's finances, and they found something interesting. For years, Callahan had been shaking down small, minority-owned businesses on his beat, demanding protection money. Those who didn't pay found themselves harassed, their customers ticketed, their businesses suddenly subject to endless inspections. The stolen Amex card at the mall wasn't an anomaly. It was part of his character. He was not just a brute, he was a thief. With the testimony of 2 police officers, a mountain of video evidence, a clear pattern of harassment, and now a federal racketeering charge, the case against Mark Callahan was no longer just about assault. It was an ironclad, multi-count federal indictment. The siege was over. It was time for the final, karmic blow. The blue wall hadn't just cracked, it was about to be demolished. The warrant was designated high risk. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit briefing room at the FBI's Oakhaven field office, The air was thick with the scent of gun oil and focused intensity. Special agent in charge of the HRT contingent, a man named Cutler with a face carved from granite, stood before a satellite map of Mark Callahan's neighborhood. Maya stood in the back of the room with Asak Peterson, a silent observer. She was the ghost at this feast, the reason for the surgical violence that was about to be unleashed. The subject is Mark Callahan, 41, 10-year veteran of the Oak Haven PD, firearms expert, and former military police, Cutler announced, his voice a low, gravelly hum. He is to be considered armed and extremely dangerous. His psychological profile, compiled by the Behavioral Analysis Unit, suggests high levels of narcissism, paranoia, and a severe propensity for violence when his authority is challenged. We have a federal judge's signature on a no-knock warrant for charges, including aggravated assault on a federal officer, deprivation of rights under color of law, and RICO statutes related to extortion. He tapped a photo of Callahan on the screen, the smug, arrogant face from his department photo. This man believes he is untouchable. He believes the badge makes him a king. This morning, we will disabuse him of that notion. The operational goal is 0 casualties. We execute with overwhelming speed and force. No dialogue, no negotiation until the subject is secured. Any questions? The room was silent. These men were professionals, the sharpened tip of the federal spear. For them, this was another entry, another dangerous man to be taken off the board. For Maya, it was the culmination of months of painstaking work, the final, violent punctuation mark on a sentence she had started writing the moment she took the case. An hour later, sitting in the passenger seat of Peterson's dark sedan, 2 blocks from Callahan's house, Maya watched the ghost-like procession of armored vehicles and tactical agents filter into the pre-dawn darkness. The silence of the suburban street felt sacred, a peace that was about to be irrevocably shattered. "Having second thoughts?" Peterson asked quietly, his gaze fixed on the street ahead. "No, sir," Maya answered, her voice steady. "Just acknowledging the gravity. There's a family in that house. Kids. They are the secondary victims of his choices, Maya," Peterson said, his tone somber. "Every decision he made, every person he brutalized, every dollar he extorted, it all led him to this exact moment. We don't create the destination. We just pave the last few feet of the road. Don't ever carry the weight of a guilty man's consequences." At precisely 6:01 a.m., the world erupted. A percussive thump boom echoed through the neighborhood as a flash bang grenade shattered the quiet. The front door of the house splintered into 1,000 pieces under the force of a battering ram. The amplified roar of FBI federal warrant was less a request and more a declaration of a shift in the cosmic order. From her vantage point, Maya could see shadows with rifles moving with a terrifying fluid grace through the house. The operation was a ballet of controlled brutality. It was over in 58 seconds. The call came over the radio, clinical and calm. "Package is secure." Mark Callahan was dragged out onto his own dew-kissed lawn. He was disoriented, half-naked, and utterly defeated. The man who had worn his uniform like a suit of armor, who had drawn his power from the fear he instilled, was now just a paunchy, middle-aged man in boxer shorts, blinking in the strobing lights, his hands tightly zip-tied behind his back. The invincible hero of the Oak Haven PD was on his knees in the grass, while his wife's horrified sobs echoed from the porch. He looked up and down the street, at the neighbors peering from their windows, at the news vans that were already arriving, and his face crumbled. The fury was gone, replaced by the stark, pathetic terror of a man who had just lost everything. The trial was a public spectacle. The U.S. Attorney's Office made it their landmark case, a clear message against police corruption. Callahan's new lawyer, a harried public defender, appointed after the police union cut him loose, was hopelessly outmatched. The prosecution's case was a methodical demolition. They presented the mall security footage on a giant screen, playing the incident from 4 different angles in perfect, damning synchronicity. They showed the jury the dozens of cell phone videos, an undeniable chorus of Callahan's unhinged rage. But the most powerful moments came from the witness stand. The retired officer, Frank Riley, his face etched with regret, detailed the long-standing pattern of abuse, culminating in his shame-filled account of Jamal Hayes' beating. I stood by and did nothing, Riley confessed, looking directly at the jury. And my silence allowed a monster to keep his badge. I am as guilty as he is for that. The most dramatic day of the trial was when Chris Evans took the stand. No longer a police officer, he was now simply Mr. Evans, a man living under federal protection. He walked into the courtroom with a quiet confidence Maya hadn't seen before. He spoke clearly, detailing not just the events at the mall, but the culture of corruption Callahan had fostered. He called it the way, Evans explained. He said, the law is what we write in our reports. He taught me how to phrase things to justify any action. If a suspect questioned you, they were verbally non-compliant. If they tensed up when you grabbed them, they were actively resisting. It was a language designed to hide the truth. On cross-examination, Callahan's lawyer tried to paint Evans as a disgruntled rookie trying to save his own skin. So, you're saying you stood by and watched Officer Callahan, a decorated hero, commit these alleged crimes? And you said nothing until the FBI offered you a deal? Evans met the lawyer's gaze without blinking. I'm saying I was a coward, sir. I was afraid of him, afraid of the system that protected him. I was wrong, but I am not a liar. The words hung in the silent courtroom, an admission of weakness that paradoxically became his greatest strength. When Maya was called to testify about the assault, she was the picture of federal composure. She recounted the events in a flat, unemotional tone, as if reading from a report. She detailed Callahan's baseless accusations, his illegal demands, his physical assault, and the terrifying moment he drew his weapon. The defense attorney tried to trap her. Special Agent Reynolds, with your extensive training, couldn't you have de-escalated the situation without being, in Officer Evans's words, difficult? Maya's response was ice cold. My job that day, counselor, was to observe the subject, not to placate him. The situation escalated for one reason, because Officer Callahan chose to escalate it. He was presented with a citizen who knew her rights, and he responded by drawing a firearm. That is not a failure of my training, it is a catastrophic failure of his character. The final nail in the coffin was Jamal Hayes. He wasn't a witness to a crime, he was the living embodiment of it. He took the stand during the sentencing phase to deliver a victim impact statement. He spoke not to the judge or the jury, but directly to Callahan. You don't remember me, do you? Jamal began, his voice trembling but clear. I was the kid you pulled from his car because you didn't like the music I was playing, the one you broke 2 ribs on for resisting. You took more than a year of my life from me. I had to drop out of school. I was scared of the police, scared to leave my house. You made me feel like I was worthless, like my life didn't matter. He took a deep breath. But sitting here watching this trial, I see you now. You're not a monster. You're just a bully, a sad, angry man who got a badge and thought it made him a king. But you're not a king. And today, you're finally being held accountable. You didn't just break my ribs, Mr. Callahan. You broke the law, you broke your oath, and now you're just broken. The jury found Mark Callahan guilty on all 17 counts. As the foreman read the final guilty, a choked sob escaped from his wife. Callahan himself just stared forward, his face slack, his eyes hollow. The world he had built, propped up by lies and intimidation, had been pulverized into dust. At the sentencing, the judge removed her glasses and looked down at the once feared officer. Mr. Callahan, you were entrusted with a sacred duty to protect and serve. You twisted that duty into a license to bully, intimidate, and brutalize. You were a cancer on the very community you swore to protect, and you poisoned the well of trust for every good and decent officer who still walks the beat. The damage you have done is immeasurable. She paused, her gaze unwavering. This court sentences you to 22 years in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. The gavel fell like a guillotine. As marshals came to lead him away, his eyes scanned the courtroom, finally landing on Maya. It was not a look of hatred anymore. It was a look of utter, desperate bewilderment, the pleading gaze of a man trying to understand how his universe had been so completely unmade. Why me? His eyes seemed to ask. How did this happen? Maya held his gaze. Her expression was not triumphant, not gloating. It was the calm, steady look of an equation being solved. He was a variable that had to be accounted for, a problem that required a solution. Her look gave him his answer. It wasn't personal. It was just your turn. It was justice. He was led away, a convicted felon stripped of his name, his badge, and his freedom. Outside, the Department of Justice was formally announcing a sweeping pattern or practice investigation into the Oak Haven Police Department. The reckoning had not ended with Mark Callahan. It had only just begun. The blue wall was coming down, brick by painful brick. The story of Special Agent Maya Reynolds and Officer Mark Callahan is a stark reminder that the systems we build to protect us can also harbor those who would do us harm. It shows that true accountability often requires an extraordinary catalyst. A moment so shocking it rips away the veil of complacency. We saw how a decorated officer's reign of terror was enabled by a code of silence, and how it took the steely resolve of one woman and the eventual courage of another officer to bring it all crashing down. This wasn't just about one bad cop. It was about the fight to hold power accountable, a fight that continues every single day in communities across the country. If this story of shocking twists and ultimate justice resonated with you, please help it reach more people. Hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We bring you compelling, true-to-life dramas every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for listening.